Donc, bienvenue à tous. Je ne connais pas tout le monde en fait, donc ça fait plaisir de vous voir ici dans cette amphi de la Maison des Sciences de l'Homme. Donc c'est une maison qui est gérée par le CNRS à l'université et donc qui a pour vocation de promouvoir l'interdisciplinarité. Je suis très heureux donc d'accueillir ce soir David Healy pour cette conférence. Il va vous être présenté dans quelques instants par Ariane Desnoyelles. Je remercie Bruno Harley qui a été le chef d'orchestre avec Ariane de cette soirée, qui est resté un peu sans voix, speechless, après des conversations passionnantes donc avec David. Donc je vous souhaite une très bonne conférence et je donne la parole sans plus tarder à Ariane. N'hésitez pas en sortant à prendre le programme des conférences de l'année si vous le souhaitez. Elles ont lieu ici le mardi entre midi et 13h30 sur différents sujets qui, je suis sûr, certains en tout cas pourront vous intéresser. Voilà, bonne conférence et Ariane, c'est à toi.
Merci Laurent. Donc voilà, la MSH qui nous accueille, Sciences Po Grenoble et le JDG, l'école de journalisme de Grenoble, ont le plaisir de recevoir David Healy. Donc je vous présente rapidement le professeur avant de lui laisser la parole. Il est psychiatre, professeur de psychopharmacologie et de psychiatrie, auteur d'une vingtaine de livres et de plus de 200 articles scientifiques. David Healy enseigne et exerce au Pays de Galles. Il est un expert reconnu, entre autres, de l'histoire de la psychopharmacologie et des essais cliniques. Avec d'autres médecins désireux d'améliorer la connaissance des médicaments et de leurs effets indésirables, il a cofondé le site de pharmacovigilance citoyenne risk.org, rxisk.org. Donc la conférence sera en anglais, mais vous disposez d'une traduction imprimée que vous avez peut-être pu prendre en entrant. Pour ceux qui n'ont pas pu prendre le document traduit, le lien figure donc sur le site de la MSH et sur le site de l'IEP de Grenoble. Voilà, donc les autres points abordés par le professeur qui ne sont pas dans le texte et les questions-réponses seront traduits par le docteur Bruno Harley, ici présent, merci déjà, et par moi-même. Voilà.
Merci bien. Okay, it's really great to be here. And I wish I could give this lecture in French. I read French, but if I was to try and talk it, I would become incoherent. Okay? So you have a translation here which will stay very close to what I will actually say. Okay? I'm also pleased to be here in a school of journalism, because I hope you can help me. Let me explain. Journalists these days write about science and write about medicine, and it seems that's a different world to the journalist world. But hopefully at the end of this talk you'll realize that I think the practice of medicine is very close to the practice of journalism. It comes much closer to journalism than to science. Let's wait and see if you agree with me at the end of the talk. I'm told that you will know the phrase, men are from Mars and women are from Venus. And that's what this copies here. And it's going to come back at the end of the lecture. But this is where the lecture starts. I had a fall nearly 5 years ago now in the shower and broke my shoulder. And it's a very bad break. I think you can maybe see it just here. This is really, this bone here should go all the way out here. It doesn't. The person looking at the x-ray said, ooh, that looks bad. But it happened on a Friday morning, and later that afternoon I had a plate put on my shoulder, and on Monday morning I was in work again. Now, healthcare like this could be delivered for free It means that the hospital and university that I work in didn't lose money on the fact that I wasn't there to treat the patients that I treat. They didn't have to hire anyone else to see the patients. It also meant that the people who came in to me to see me for healthcare kept seeing the person they were used to seeing rather than having to meet a stranger. It meant that I could keep doing the research that I was doing. This is good for me. It was good for my family. It was good for the community that I come from. And it's just good generally. It's the kind of healthcare that could be delivered for free. But a few weeks later, I get this letter here. And this is an invitation to me to get my bones screened in case the fracture that I had was caused by some bone thinning. And this kind of letter goes out to everybody who has a broken bone in the UK, and probably here in France too. It goes out as part of an advertising campaign, almost, and it's what's causing healthcare to be bankrupt. It's an advertising campaign for the companies that make drugs like this. This is a bone thickening drug that is used for women in particular who have osteoporosis, which means bone thinning, or osteopenia, which means a hint of bone thinning. This is not a real illness. This is extraordinarily common. It actually affects some men, and it also affects loads of women over the age of 50. But it's harmless. But the offer here from the advert to the people who run healthcare is the same offer as putting a plate in David Healy's shoulder. This will save you money. This will be good for people. And it meant that when these drugs came on stream, the companies that made these drugs had the results from the trials they did built into guidelines which said you should use these drugs if you've got any bone thinning at all. And they provided free machines to hospitals to screen for bone thinning. And when the results of getting free screening didn't work out right because the rates of fracture went up, not down, the next step was to employ auditors to work out just what's going wrong, and then to employ people to actually try to manage this bit of healthcare to see could they put things right. In the case of older people like this, and the advert says if you treat this lady here, it will be good for her, it will be good for the family, it'll be good for the community, it'll be good for everyone. When things began to go wrong, though, the answer was, well, this is just to do with aging. When people age, they need more treatments, they need more drugs, and this isn't a thing that we can ever put right. It isn't a thing we can ever cure. People are always going to be aging. The problem with the drugs, and if you think about it, thickening bones sounds good, but if you thicken bones too much, you increase the rate at which they break. These fractures, and some of them are awfully serious fractures, like the one you see here, which can't be repaired. You ruin lives. But these problems didn't show up in the clinical trials, which were very short clinical trials. You have to be on the drugs for a longer period of time for things like this to begin to happen. But it isn't just the fracture here that I want you to think about. It's the fact that These drugs, which were high-cost drugs, people talk about the high cost of drugs, but actually the real cost is we spent extra money putting screening programs in place, putting auditors in place, putting people to manage this bit of healthcare in place. So all of a sudden, the high cost of the drugs seems a very small part of the healthcare budget, which is being pushed up, linked to the drugs. Okay, and the next point is that this has nothing to do with aging. We're doing the same thing with children here. And this is an unhappy Bart Simpson, whose father, Homer, says to him, "Ha, no, this isn't the worst day of your life. This is the worst day of your life so far." Somewhere in the system, we've lost the ability to be wise. We've lost the ability to say to older men and older women that you don't want to take a pill to thicken up your bones, that maybe it's a good idea to go out and ride a bike. Maybe it's a good idea to mow the grass. It's a good idea to be fit rather than to take a pill. In the same way, we've lost the ability to let kids experience life and toughen up that way. We rather quickly reach to a pill and put them on pills. And we put a screening program in place in schools to pick up any children who have any odd behaviors at all. And we put auditors in place and people to manage the child healthcare systems, because the problems of children, when we give more pills, aren't going away. They're getting worse somehow. Part of the problem is this, and this is a thing that may interest journalists, which is that most of the articles about on-patent drugs, whether the antidepressants are drugs for your heart, or your gut, or your bones, are ghost-written. And I don't mean the articles in obscure newspapers. I mean the articles in the best medical journals are ghost-written. The ghostwriters don't look like this. They're usually women who have PhDs, for whom this is a very convenient career, because you can write up the results of the study from home. And loads of the ghostwriters have hundreds of articles in the best journals in the field, more than people who've won Nobel Prizes have. And this may give you a feel for things. This is a piece of paper from a brochure that was produced about Pfizer's SSRI antidepressant Zoloft. And it's a 50-page brochure about all the articles that are being produced about Zoloft for people who are depressed, people who are anxious, people who've got social phobia, for the elderly, for the young, for people who've got other physical illnesses. And this is just the page about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And over here on the right, oops, the pointer is just about working, but not clearly. Over here on the right, you can see that two clinical trials have been done, 2 articles have been written, and they're both going to the premier journals in the field, JAMA and the New England Journal of Medicine. Over here on the left, you can see author TBD. That means to be determined. The academic person whose name is going to end up on these articles has not yet been chosen. They're going to pick people depending on whose is the best name for marketing purposes. The ghostwriters haven't seen the raw data from the clinical trials, and the academics don't get to see it either. Now, one more thing here is I'm going to leave the slides behind me so you can all have all of these slides and you can use them. Please feel free to use them. Oh, let me just go back and make one more point. Donald Trump has introduced us recently to the idea of fake news. The greatest concentration of fake news on earth centers on the drugs your doctor gives you, or your children, or your parents. And that's been the case for 30 years now. Okay? What we've had more recently is a public relations campaign run by the pharmaceutical industry to say that any articles about the hazards of drugs or the hazards of vaccines or any aspect of medical care, that's fake news. But the original fake news is about the hyping the benefits of drugs and hiding the hazards. Right, let me switch to the politics here. And for most people, politics and economics comes very close together. What I want to try and persuade you is you should stop thinking about politics in terms of economics and think about it more in terms of healthcare. In 1848, you know, we had a revolution here in France. And the seeds of it began around 1840 in Lyon, where people like Louis-René Villermé are concerned. He's a doctor looking at the public health aspects of the injuries or the new harms that are being reported in people working in the silk industry and the cotton industry around the Lyon area. He's interested in those hazards and harms and the hazards and harms that are introduced by the new machines that are driving wages down. So it's not just the injuries that come from working in the factory, but it's also the injuries that come from people having less money, being poorer. Villermé's work was a major impetus to the founding of the Communist Party, which begins around 1840 in the Lyon area with a man called Etienne Cabet. Karl Marx, 8 years later, adopts the word communist because there are 100,000 communists in France by then. There are no communists anywhere else in the world, they're all in France. Just to give you more of a feel for it is, Marx was writing his work with Friedrich Engels, who in 1845 in England had written a book on the conditions of the working class in England. And if you read the book, it's not just about the economics, it's about the health of the working class in England. So really what the Communist Manifesto is, it's not an economic manifesto, it's as much a healthcare manifesto. You know, of course, that after 1848, all of the communists left France and emigrated to the United States, where they became extremely influential. But okay. And in 1848, the other person who brings this on the map was Rudolf Virchow in Germany, who says that politics is nothing more than medicine on a grand scale. I'm going to hop 60 years or more to this man here, who's the first chief medical officer in the first Department of Health in the UK. This is George Henry Newman, and he's writing to the first Minister of Health in the UK, and the vision he outlines is, up till this we've been trying to keep the streets clean and trying to put sewerage systems in place. We need to focus on making the population healthier. And the vision was one of tending a garden, just the way you would weed out the bad plants and the weeds and try and encourage the growth of the strong plants. That was the vision behind public health. It's a vision that fed into the idea of eugenics. It's a vision that also led to the Holocaust. The Holocaust did not begin with the Nazi Party trying to exterminate the Jews. It began with removing people who were mentally handicapped and mentally ill. Anyone who was not part of the garden that the people who ran the country wanted to see. And just as the war came to an end, Friedrich Hayek wrote this book, which is usually seen as the first book to make an argument for neoliberalism. Hayek was saying we want to return to the kind of liberalism we had during the 19th century, which is fine for economics, maybe, but if you think about it, it doesn't make sense in healthcare, where we've got to have some kind of planning. Healthcare is much more like driving your car on the road. You can't let people just do whatever they want to do. You've got to have some signs and some agreed rules to make the whole thing work. So Hayek's vision, which mentions nothing about health, is one that's not particularly applicable to health, but it's happened in health. That's sort of the core of the argument that I'm trying to make to you. How did it happen? Well, this is moving slower than it was before. I don't know if you guys have heard of this lady here. Actually, Margaret Mead was one of the best-known sociologists in the world during the 1940s, 1950s. And she comes out with this phrase here, which you can Google and find easily, and I'm sure you've seen it before, or will see it if you look around. It's a phrase that's repeated a lot. It's a phrase that's inspirational, but no one knows when she came out with it, and no one knows who she was referring to. Margaret Mead was part of a small group of people who created what was called cybernetics. Now, that's a word that's gone out of fashion, but the idea was it was created by a group of people who were behind the development of the first computers. And the idea was the way computers work, it's a bit like an algorithm or a thermostat. If things rise to a particular point, or if the thermostat gets a particular message, it does a particular thing. If the temperature goes up, it turns the heating off. That's the kind of thinking that was behind the early computers. And the people behind this kind of thinking said, well, this happens in biology also. The human body regulates itself in a little bit the same kind of way. And this gave rise to what's called systems thinking and management theory. That an organization is a little bit like the algorithmic flowchart you see here. Just lots of these superimposed, and you get an organization. And the job of the manager is to just ensure that the information flows around the system in the right kind of way, that we have the right benchmarks, that we have the right performance reviews. What wasn't foreseen then, of course, is if the system works like this, maybe you can outsource one of the boxes to India and a different box to China or whatever. That, the organization doesn't all need to be in the one place. The organization doesn't necessarily depend on people meeting people. It depends instead on a mission statement, maybe, which says, we care, or something like that. I don't know if any of you guys know where the word cybernetics comes from. The word cyber these days immediately for people says computer, cyborgs, cyberspace. But the original word is kubernesis, which is a Greek word, which is the same as the Latin word gubernator, from which we get government. Cybernetics is about governing things. The year before he died, the person who was most responsible for the development of this kind of thinking, Norbert Wiener, wrote this book, which said, actually, we may have made a problem here. I'm concerned about this child that I've brought into the world. It might do more harm than good. cybernetics, thermostats, are good for a closed system. They're not good for an open system. They're not good for a system where people make choices and should have to take responsibility. And he was the first person that I know of to anticipate a world where we would have full artificial intelligence. And he said this would be a point of real peril for the human race. So this was heading into the 1960s, and one of the most influential economic thinkers during that time was a man in the States called John Kenneth Galbraith, who wrote two books that are read widely. One was The Affluent Society in 1958, which said that everything's getting better and better and better. People are freer to live a more easygoing, liberal kind of life than they were before. Nobody's in quite the same desperate poverty, at least in the United States, that they were in before. 10 years later, Galbraith said, well, actually, things aren't as good as I said before. We're in a world where the market is controlled more than ever before. As opposed to big companies making the things we need, they have now got so powerful that they can create our wants to fit what they have. We fit in with them rather than them fitting in with us. And the managers of these corporations, he said, who are they and what are they? We've assumed they're entrepreneurs. But he said, they're not. They're bureaucrats. The people who had the US troops that had come home from World War II, as part of an effort to handle them, what the government had done was to ensure that a large proportion of the officer class, at least, had gone to places like Harvard and Yale, where they got a new degree, an MBA, a Master's in Business Administration. These became the people who ran corporations after the war. And what Galbraith is saying is they were bureaucrats rather than entrepreneurs, which is what we assume they were. One of the other things that was happening during the 1960s is this. When VMA did his work around the Lyon area and Paris area in 1840 or so, most of the population worked on the land. Very few people worked making things. From about 1850 to 1950, most people worked making things rather than on the land. But as of the 1950s, things changed. We got what was called the service industries. These were people who worked in retail, people who worked in the hospitality industry, the banking industry, the insurance industry, and things like that. They weren't making things, and they weren't working on the land either. There were a group of people who looked like this. Now, included in the mix here are doctors and nurses, as you'll see. But this is not the way things were, at least until quite recently. Medicine was not part of the service industry. Our universities weren't part of the service industry. The two big groups of people who weren't part of the service industries, who are now part of the service industries, were healthcare and universities. In the case of healthcare, you'll be able to see why. In terms of cars, renting cars and things like that, once an industry can produce the same car every time and get it insured, you can rent it out to people. You can provide a service. In the same way with TVs, the service industries, and this will be of interest to journalists, the service industries were able to produce programs for TVs. One of the other key things was they were able to track who watched what. And if more people watched Disney than Shakespeare, well, they could give you Disney rather than Shakespeare. And with fast food here, this is perhaps the best example of the service industries. Quality food in this case means giving you the exact same meal every time. Not giving you a good meal, but the same every single time. And the problem with medicine, which doesn't fit into the service industry model, is when I give you a drug, when I give you a drug, I'm giving you a poison. The magic of medicine is bringing good out of the use of a poison. That's not something that fits into the service industry model. It's not something that insurers like the idea of. Magic? How to insure magic? It's not something that management like the idea of. So I guess the question is, how did medicine or how did universities ever become part of the service industry? One of the people who tracked this most closely during the 1960s was a guy called Herbert Marcuse, whom you see here. This is his most famous book. He said we were moving into a one-dimensional world. We were moving into a world where people did things rather than thought about doing things. His answer to the problems he saw emerging were we need more philosophy, but that's not the way we've gone. And one of the ways it becomes clearest about what was going on, I mean, he was one who talked about the fact that the culture industries now look at the numbers, and if people go to a Disney movie rather than a Shakespearean play, well, Hollywood produces Disney movies. In the same kind of way, medicine became much more about numbers than about judgment. Rather than a journalist trying to decide what the true story is here, it was more a case of, well, what sells? If I put these phrases in the article that I write, my article is going to sell more, rather than, well, what's the real thing people need to know? In the case of blood pressure, for instance, you could measure blood pressure by numbers. If you age, like me, and particularly if you're male, you know, where the male brain needs a bit of blood to make sure it functions at all, a little bit of a raised blood pressure is a good thing. But all of a sudden, any elevation of blood pressure was seen as something to be treated with a pill. Yeah, actually, just one more quick thing there. You've heard the phrase pecunia non olet, money doesn't smell. Numero non olet is a little bit the same thing. Rather than people contesting things, rather than people having different points of view, the idea was the numbers dictate what you do. And from an economic point of view, this came on stream in Chile during the 1960s, where what we now call neoliberalism was properly born. That's not what it was called, first of all. And curiously, if you look at, well, if you try and get some definition of what neoliberalism is, you'll find it terribly hard to get. There's even books about neoliberalism, the history of, which don't tell you what it actually is. It begins in Chile in 1976, when there's a very high rate of inflation, and the Chicago School of Economics gets called in to try and see what could be done about this, and they propose controlling the supply of money. While the inflation rate goes up, you reduce the amount of money circulating. It's like a thermostat. It's algorithmic. You don't look at the state of the country. You don't look at the state of the people. You reduce the supply of money regardless of the condition of the country. The general consensus was that this experiment failed. But it didn't stop people doing this afterwards. They kept doing it because it seemed a rational thing to do. In exactly the same way, medicine, and in particular, mental health care has gone operational. It's gone thermostat-like. We've introduced definitions for the different conditions you could have, which are all about, if you've got 5 of these 9 features, then you have the condition. I mean, if I've got a flu, or if any of the women here are pregnant, you will meet the criteria for being depressed. Previously, we would have said, well, if you're pregnant or if you have influenza, then that should outrule the idea that I think you're depressed. But now it became a case of, well, if you meet the criteria, you are depressed. And a phrase emerged in the UK which you may not ever have had, because I don't know it actually translates in the same way. There is no alternative. And the reason this phrase became so popular was that it could be abbreviated to a girl's name. Tina. I don't know if any of you guys are aware of this, but just it's a small little footnote to history. And the same applies, the same kind of thinking applied to asthma. We could check your peak flow rates, and if your peak flow was reduced, you had asthma. If your cholesterol levels were raised, again, you had a risk factor for future disorders that we were going to treat. If your blood pressure was raised, if your glucose was raised, these were all things that we were going to treat. Now, I've got a lower peak flow rate than probably anyone here in this room, and I've got a higher cholesterol level probably than anyone in this room, but I'm not in the business of letting anyone treat me. Because these are just risk factors. They're not a disease, but they became the disease that we were treating. And perhaps the best way to bring this out is that in France in 1873, doctors described a new illness for the first time, Anorexia Nervosa, which appeared a few years after the first weighing scales for humans appeared. And anorexia nervosa became more common when the weighing scales carried norms on the front of them saying what weight was the optimal weight. And if you were over that weight, the pressure was on you to reduce your weight. You began to eat in a stranger and stranger way. And as weighing scales migrated from pharmacies into all of our homes, the rate of eating disorders goes up. We're facing a similar kind of situation now where on our phones we've got apps which measure our emotions and the way we're thinking and all sorts of aspects of the way we breathe, the way we sleep, the number of steps we take each day. These are all going to cause nervosas, an increasing number of nervosas, which is all good for health service industry, but is very bad for healthcare. Numbers create risks. We didn't have risks in medicine before 1970. The first articles on risk in medicine appear around 1970. We now have 20,000 articles every single year about risks. So there's a complete change in the culture. What we've got is a neo-medicalism, which is exactly like neoliberalism. If you guys don't fully understand what neoliberalism is, and I'm not sure I do, what I'm saying to you, what I'm asking you to do is just look at what's happening to healthcare. Look at what's happening to your health in your daily life, and that's neoliberalism. And the answer to this, I mean, if the figures for X are high, then we want you to give brand drug Y to sort the problem out. It's an act of hypnosis. This is Mesmer here putting a lady under hypnosis. It's exactly the same approach. If X, then Y. And there are three things that can interfere with a person being hypnotized. One is things going wrong. So from that point of view, what the pharmaceutical industry and people running health services don't want is any mention of an adverse event. The other two things they don't want is personal contact. They want me to interview you with a rating scale. They don't want me to be looking closely at you to see what you're actually maybe thinking and asking you a different kind of question. That's not what they want. They also don't really want me to be seeing you the next week and the week after. They want someone to see you, probably not the same person, but who will be using the same rating scale. And the other thing that they don't want is they don't want people making a judgment call. They don't want your view about what's going on, or my view, and they definitely don't want a joint view. This is just a quick slide for the UK, and you don't need to pay any heed. Well, it's drawn from the UK, you don't need to pay any heed to it. It's just a cue for me to say, up till about 2002, in the UK we had a public health system. Everything was free. It was the National Health Service. And the contrast, the extreme contrast was with the United States, where they had private healthcare notionally. But in fact, if I talk to people who come from the United States these days, as doctors, we have exactly the same experience. Whether you're working in the United States or in the UK, it's exactly the same. You're responding to managers who think they know what's going on, who now have guidelines that are compiled from the clinical trials that have been done, the ghostwritten articles from the clinical trials, and the managers think they know what should be happening, and medical discretion, or patient discretion, is not wanted. The healthcare we end up with, and this is rather like what happens in at the university system as well, is much more a supermarket model of healthcare. You've got frontline staff who may change from week to week, who man the counters. You've got some people who walk up and down behind the counters to keep an eye on in case anything goes wrong with a particular good you're trying to check out. And the managers who operate the supermarket aren't on site. The people who walk up and down behind the counter are what used to be called doctors. Nurses now often do the prescribing, and they're the ones on the front line with no discretion at all. As one of my patients said to me lately, you know, when I take my dog to the vet, my dog gets more person-centered care than I get in the health services. It's not healthcare, it's health services. So the point all this began to really bite was around 1990, and this slide here is aimed at that period. It's the point at which you as patients and me as a doctor began to become invisible. It's the point at which people, when they took an antidepressant and had sexual dysfunction on the antidepressant, and 100% of people who take an SSRI have some sexual changes. Your genitals are affected 30 minutes after you take the first pill. The label from the drug said sexual dysfunction happens in less than 5% of people who take these pills. And that's based on controlled trials, RCTs as we say in English. I don't know if you've got the same term at all actually here in France, but controlled trials said that the rate of sexual dysfunction is less than 5%. This is the point at which if you come in to me and say, I'm on these drugs, or I was on these drugs, and I'm now off them for 3 months and I am still not able to function, if I believe you were both accused of engaging or dealing in anecdotes, it's just a story. The control trial, the science says this can't be happening. Now, like a journalist, my view is that my job as a doctor is to listen to your story, to cross-examine you, to assume that you're probably telling me the truth. Bearing in mind, some people come along to me as a doctor and are trying to tell me things for all sorts of other reasons, but that's not normally the case. When people come and talk to me about a thing that has happened, I should, in general, believe them, but cross-examine them to try and find out, could there be any other reason than what they think is the cause for the problem. And if I can't see any other reason, and you can't see any other reason, the drug has probably caused the problem. That's good journalism. It's also good science. The next job I have, if the big science appears to say something else, that the drug couldn't cause the problem, The next job I have is to work out why there's a mismatch between this bit of science and that bit of science. And in the case of the antidepressants and sexual dysfunction, or the antidepressants and people becoming suicidal, the mismatch is because the big science is all ghost-written. And there's no access to the data behind the clinical trials. When someone gets to see the data behind the clinical trials, they can see that 50% of the men who get put on SSRIs as healthy volunteers, they're not depressed, nothing wrong with them, they're healthy volunteers, they get put on SSRIs. Within a week, they're complaining of severe sexual dysfunction. And in some cases, it goes on after the pill is stopped. So actually, the big science will tend to fit what you figure must be happening. But the issue is trying to work out how the two views turn out to be different. This is also a point where drugs become something different to what they were. They had been drugs, and we knew that the pharmaceutical industry hyped the benefits and hid the harms, but they were real drugs. People knew things could go wrong. As of 1990 and as of the SSRIs, they become sacraments. Nothing can go wrong when you take the sacrament. It's a bit like, there's a book that goes into this quite well, written by Irving Goffman on gender advertisements, which brings out the idea that brands and advertising and all drugs, in a sense, become hyper-real entities. They're not poisons the way they once were. And the other thing that happens around this time that fits in well is that rather than us being the people we were, the mixed up, confused people who came from communities who knew who we were and what our backgrounds were, we get identities rather than selves. We get identities that need to be managed, rather like the way the pharmaceutical industry manages its brands. And our identities have to be kind of perfect. They can't be a mixture of good and bad the way they were before. This is an issue that maybe you guys will have some thoughts about that needs to be brought out a bit more, I think. In terms of running health services, the offer was health services run by people who have MBAs were going to be much more entrepreneurial. They were going to be more innovative. We were going to get healthcare. We were going to get treatments that worked that we didn't have before. But again, this is a place where I need your input. The word entrepreneur, as George Bush once said, do the French have entrepreneurs? Well, it's a French word, okay? I need the inside-out French word, and I've put one here which doesn't quite fit. Rather than getting this vision, which is what we thought we were going to get, we got this. We got a risk-avoidant universe. And somewhere in the middle, I've got this strange word which I've created, entre-fuir, risk-avoidant. But if any of you guys can come up with a word that you think will stick in there, that the public will get, I'd be interested to hear about it. But it's a world where everybody working in the service is working in a hostile environment. They've got targets on their back. The leader isn't one who leads by example. It's the person behind you who's aiming a gun at you. And this is one more quick thing to bring the point home. This again, a little bit more mood music rather than anything else. I'm not from the UK. I'm not from Wales. I'm Irish. And for us, Brexit is great. It's seeing the English have a nervous breakdown is wonderful. But this is 1974, and in a pub in Guildford in England, there's a bomb which kills some people. And 4 Irish people are picked up as being the people who laid the bomb in the pub. It turns out they're innocent. It takes 20 years for English people working on their behalf to get them out of an English jail. And part of what's keeping them in jail for so long is that the Chief Justice in England at that time says this is an appalling story. If their story is right, people will lose confidence in the law. They have to therefore remain in jail forever. And it's the same with healthcare. If any of you have an injury on a drug, or if your children or your parents have an injury on a drug, and go along to the health services to find out what happened these days, you will find the people who run health services saying to you, well, look, we did everything right. We kept to the guidelines. You will walk out of the room as mystified as to why your parent or your husband or your wife or your children are dead as you were when you walked into the room. Because no one wants to let you know that treatments, poisons, can kill you. Because if, you see, the problem is if they were to concede this, they've got to have a box in the flowchart for handling this. If they've got a box in the flowchart to handle the fact that poisons might poison you, then they've got to take into account the fact that all the literature which says poisons can't poison you is ghost-written. And that's above the pay grade of the people who run health services. And it's above the pay grade of the politicians in France or the UK or elsewhere. So how do we solve the problem? Well, I think this cartoon is great. This is God saying we're going to put some guidelines in place. And then God deciding, well, maybe that's not a good idea to have a thermostat like the Ten Commandments. I'm going to come down to earth and, help you find the answer. Well, this is an experiment, as we know, that didn't turn out all that well. And here's one component to the answers, I think. I mean, what the previous slide says to you is this isn't going to be an easy thing to solve. A key component to the answer is this, and you see it here. Walter Raleigh was a favourite of Queen Elizabeth I. But after she died and King James took over, King James didn't like Walter Raleigh. He was a very influential, charismatic figure who helped do all sorts of things like discover parts of the New World and things like this. But he ends up in jail, and he ends up being executed on the basis of hearsay. That is, people who had said things that he had said and did, but who weren't prepared to come into court to be cross-examined. And when that happened after he was executed, the English legal system and legal systems worldwide, and journalism, I guess, figured that we can't operate on the basis of hearsay. We've got to have people come into the room to be cross-examined. We've got to have a real name behind the event. If you're harmed by a drug and your doctor reports the harm to the regulators in France or to the European Medicines Agency, they don't give them your name. They cannot follow you up. They can't cross-examine you. Every harm that happens to you becomes hearsay. If we're going to change that, you have to insist your name remains on the report and your doctor's name remains on the report, and both of you ideally have to be willing to come into court to be cross-examined, because this is how we establish whether things have probably happened linked to the drug or not. One of the other people, rather than God, one of the other people that may be helping move us forward is Donald Trump, who recently, in response to a school shooting in the United States, said, we should have a good guy with a gun in all of these schools. Now, most people reacted with horror at that idea, and they said, oh, that just doesn't sound clever. To which the response is, well, if we don't put a good guy with a gun in school, why do we have good guys with guns outside the White House? There's something in there, though, which is guns work. They're efficacious. But we figure that just because it works, if we spread something that's efficacious too far, if we let it leak into situations that it shouldn't be in, that things will go wrong. This brings me almost to the end, which is guns and drugs are actually rather similar. Both work. They can enhance, like any technique, they can enhance or diminish us. But the gun and the drug as such isn't going to enhance or diminish us. It's our use of these things that's going to enhance or diminish us. Guns and drugs are amoral. The morality is something that we bring to the table. The nuclear bomb shows there's a limit to efficacy. You can produce a weapon that's so effective that we can't use it. In the same way, drugs are effective, but we've now learned that if you're on 5 or more drugs, that you're going to die earlier. You're more likely to go into hospital than not. Your quality of life expectancy is going to be worse. 45% of the people over the age of 45 are now on 3 or more drugs every single day of the week. In the 1980s, people were on 1 drug at the most for a few weeks or a few months. They weren't on them every single day of the week for the rest of their life. Now, over the age of 45, you will be on 3 or more drugs. Over the age of 65, you're on 5 or more drugs, 40% of the population. And this is an average figure. There's a few people who are on no drugs, which means that actually the norm, the most common amount of drugs that people over the age of 65 are on is 7 drugs. And there are plenty of people on 15 or more. And the commonest adverse effects of drugs, when you think about things going wrong on a drug, you think about the limbless babies born on thalidomide. Or you think of drugs that maybe in rare occasions reduce your white cell count, and that can kill you. The most common adverse effects of a drug that kill you are now hemorrhages. The drugs you're put on to control your coagulation are more likely to kill you by hemorrhage than anything else is. The diabetes drugs to lower your blood sugar are the commonest reason for you to end up in hospital, much commoner than diabetes. The antihypertensives we put you on lead to falls. That's a much commoner reason for you to end up in hospital than the fact that your blood pressure was raised. You end up with a fall and you also end up with a fracture. And antidepressants are more likely to cause you to commit suicide than the conditions they're given for. So I'm just going to rephrase this slightly. Hopefully you can see this is a kind of medicine that I think, if you don't figure that the medicine that I do is very close to the journalism you do, then I've given the wrong talk. I need to improve the talk. But economics is from Mars, medicine is from Venus. There used to be another juxtaposition here, which was rationality versus magic. Rationality is from Mars in the sense of algorithms, things that make sense. This little bit makes sense. It's an algorithm that can be capitalized. We can make money out of it. Magic is from Venus. The idea that we're going to bring good out of the use of a pill. It's a more complex thing. Trying to put this problem right is going to take courage, which means the answers are going to come from women, not men. Thank you. Can I say just one quick thing before Bruno interposes? The talk you've just heard, and that's on this here, there's a short book about this that I've written, which we're going to publish soon. When I say it's short, it's going to be around 12,000 words, which is not long, okay? It needs to be translated into French and into Spanish and other things, but let's just stick for the moment with French. It's going to get published soon. If any of you are interested in these ideas and interested in the idea of translating it into French, could you get in touch with me, okay? Translation doesn't mean that you faithfully have to reproduce every word that I produce in English. It's getting hold of the meaning of the ideas and putting them into French. I'm not asking you to do me a favor, okay? If it gets translated and sells, all of the royalties will go to whoever it is of you who does the translation, not to me. Okay? Thanks.